Limiting beliefs, they're tricky because they're hard to see. They're not necessarily like readily available. It's not something that we're often conscious about. But sometimes we know what they are, and that's mostly because we've been experiencing the frustration of dealing with them. But the ego loves to kind of mask them in a way, loves to throw our situation externally and say it's because of this or because of that person or because I'm just unlucky. But we often like to throw our struggles onto the external world and say it's the external world's fault. But if you believe in manifestation and you're trying to practice manifestation, one of the key things I believe is that you have to accept 100% responsibility for all of your decisions, all of your actions, and ultimately all of your results. Right? If you believe that you are manifesting your reality, you don't get to decide when you do and when you don't. It's always being manifest, and meaning it's always being created by you. And so you first have to accept that if you are struggling in some area, it has something to do with what you are doing or something that you believe. And we don't have to beat ourselves up about this. We're not wrong for this. It's not like we're like bad people or that we suck because we're getting these terrible results. It's just taking that accountability puts the power back in our own hands to make better decisions and get better results. As long as we have it externally as it's something else or somebody else, those things or those people will always have the power to control us. So we take that on and we say, okay, it's something I'm doing, but it might not be something that you're doing on purpose, right? Limiting beliefs, like we talked about, they're beliefs. And a lot of times people don't fully understand their beliefs. It's something that you're not thinking of or not trying to do. It's subconscious. The mind really is a programmable machine, and it's been programmed since the day you open your eyes to be the way you are. Through all the experiences you've had, through all the lessons you've learned, through all the people you've talked to, things you've heard on TV, all that stuff has instilled ideas in you that are living out on a day-to-day basis. So some of those beliefs that we have, or some of those things that we've heard or bought into over the years, are not necessarily serving us. And that's what we're going to talk about, is how do we overcome those beliefs that we have that don't serve us well. And like most of my videos, I think that you have to start by first identifying what those beliefs are. And you can do this through really self-reflection. I think is the best way to go about this, is to really start asking yourself questions and really approaching your life like a scientist, right? Like looking at what am I doing? Like what inputs am I putting out? What kind of work am I doing? What am I saying to people? How am I feeling on a day-to-day basis? And not even just a day-to-day basis, but like how do you feel in certain moments? Have you ever noticed, we use this word a lot, triggers, right? Like you have a trigger, like when somebody says a particular phrase to you that it somehow just irks you in a certain way, and maybe it causes you to feel anger or sadness, or it just triggers some type of like feeling, and it's almost instantaneously, like as soon as you see it or hear it. Or sometimes like a song, you hear a song and it can take you to a certain place, or you smell something and it takes you to a certain place. These are triggers. These are things that are deep in our subconscious that we've linked to two things, right? Like we've heard something, said something, or somebody said something to us, and we might not be able to pinpoint it, but we know when it happens. So when I talk about approaching your life like a scientist, you really want to get in the weeds of your life and see like, when does this happen, right? Like if you find yourself lacking motivation sometimes, really ask yourself like, are there certain times of day that I feel that way? Is it when I'm around certain people? When I don't eat, when I do eat, when I'm not drinking enough water, right? Like we have to become self-aware of all of our different inputs and experiences so we can really start to pinpoint when we have these certain triggers, because those can really be clues into what this limiting belief that we might have is. And so once we identify that and we're like, okay, cool, I notice a pattern. That's a lot of times how you'll uncover these things, is you'll notice a pattern. Every day when I wake up, I feel like this. After going for a jog, I notice that I feel a lot better. My mind's a lot clearer, or whatever the case may be. And so you're looking for these patterns in your life, and those will start to tell you where these beliefs might be. But you do that often through self-reflection. The ability to step back from your day-to-day experiences and look at them objectively, as if you're some other person. This is why we often can give really good advice to our friends, but we can't take our own advice, is because we're not living it, right? So you almost want to do that to yourself. You want to go back and look at your experiences as somebody else, like a friend, and just be like, look, like, why'd you say that right there? Like, did you feel like you were in control right there? Like, were you doing what you wanted to do, or were you finding yourself almost subconsciously reacting to the situation? And so you can find those limiting beliefs through that. Really, journaling helps a lot. Really, like I said, self-awareness is a big key to that. But the first step is to identify these beliefs. I like to take it a step further, because often, like I said, you've been programmed to feel, think, or do these certain things in these certain times. So sometimes it can really help too to pinpoint where that belief came from. Right? So you have an idea of like what that belief is, but then you want to be like, well, where did I get this idea? Like, where did this idea come from? Was it my mom telling me this all the time when we were growing up, like things about money? Maybe my mom struggled with money and I watched her do that, and she instilled in me this idea that it's really difficult to make money. Or maybe a past relationship scarred me really deeply, and so now I find myself getting triggered in my current relationships based on what this person said to me in that relationship or what I experienced in it. Because when you finally, like, when you can pinpoint like where it's coming from, then you can often like really step back from it, right? Like, so I think of this example of when I was talking to somebody, they had this really like low self-esteem. And they had this hard time where they just could not really think highly of themselves. And I said, well, where do you think that came from? We did some work trying to identify like where that belief came from. And he talked a lot about how his stepdad would often like put him down a lot. And everything that he tried to do was never really like good enough for him. And this person actually had a terrible relationship with their stepfather, obviously. But they did not get along. And so when he found out that that was a belief that he was carrying around from the things that his stepfather put into him, it was like so easy for him to let it go, because he was like, well, I don't want to live like that. Like, I don't want to take on anything that this person tried to instill in me. And so he was able to discard it. But it was a lot easier once he identified, once he separated it from, it's not me saying these things about me. It's not the way I feel about myself. It's the way I've been conditioned through somebody else, right? So we first figure out what it is, where it came from. But another key step is the brain works kind of in replacement, right? Like this works really well with habits. A lot of times people say, well, I want to stop doing this bad habit. But the brain works a lot better when you replace that habit with a different habit, because you have to do something in that time or in those moments. And so shifting from doing a bad thing to a good thing helps, right? And the same thing happens in beliefs. We identify, okay, I have this belief, and it's great to write it out in a sentence. I believe that I'm not worthy enough because of XYZ, or I believe it's hard to make money, or whatever the case may be. Then we try and identify a belief that would better suit us. And I'm going to talk about why that's important in a second, that last part about that suits us. So just stick with me, because we're going to talk about that. But let's find a belief that better suits us. Like, maybe it would be better to suit us if we said, it's easy to make money, right? Like, that just works better for me. And again, I'm going to talk about that in a second. But now you want to go out and you want to look for evidence that supports this new belief that you want to have, right? Just like the same way you were conditioned through maybe media or people of authority or repetition, you're going to have to use these same ideas to instill this new belief in yourself. Sometimes when people identify a belief, they think, oh, okay, cool, I figured it out, now I'm free from it. But it doesn't really work that way. That was trained into you, and so it has to be kind of untrained. And so you have to start reinforcing this new belief, and that's going to take time and practice, as most things that we talk about do. It's not a switch. You can't just flip it on and off. You're going to have to work at it. And so you start instilling it. You start reading new books. You start looking for new supporting material. You find mentors and people that you look up to that reaffirm this new belief that you want to have. And through that, you start to believe that to be more of the truth than this other thing. Because here's somebody that you really love, that has a lot of respect for you and care for you, and they're telling you this, that you're awesome, that you're talented, you're super cool, you're super like an amazing person, and you honor and appreciate their opinion more than, let's say, this stepfather or wherever you got this negative belief from. And so it starts to become a lot easier to be like, well, yeah, that guy was trying to fuck me and this person loves me, so it's a lot easier for me to start to adopt this belief system. And so you train that, right? And I just talked about a little bit about the steps that you can do to train it, so I definitely want to give you those. There's about 3 different ways that we gain beliefs in the first place. One is authority. Somebody of importance told us this thing and we believe it, right? So if the president comes onto the TV, man, this example doesn't hit as well anymore, right? Because it's even hard to believe what comes out of our president's mouth or the media's mouth, but let's just say somebody like a president that you trust who's like good guy, and he's like telling you there's UFOs, right? Well, you're probably gonna automatically believe that. If you're a conspiracy theory friends are like, yo, UFOs, you're like, whatever, man, this dude's crazy. But if somebody of authority came and told you that, it would carry a lot more weight. So sometimes it's people of authority. Most times, I'm gonna give you the shortcut here, most times it's our parents, right? A lot of the beliefs that we have were molded in us from the age 0 to 7, in our childhood, in our earliest developmental years. And again, that's why they're so hard, because they're buried deep. So it's parents, their authority. But sometimes it's teachers. Sometimes, like I said, it's a friend that you looked up to a lot or whatever. But so authority is one way that we can establish a belief. Another one is repetition. If you hear something enough times, right? If you keep running into the same idea over and over and over, you really start to believe it. It becomes like more natural. We see this in social media all the time. If an idea starts catching fire, then we all believe it. We all tapped into it. It just becomes truth, right? And then the last one is self-experience, right? Like when you've actually seen, like they say, seeing is believing, right? So when you've actually seen it happen, that becomes like a lot of truth, right? Like it's easy to see the truth in that because you've experienced it, and so it's real to you. So going out and trying new things, doing things, like let's say if you're afraid of heights, one of the fastest ways to get over that is start going into high places. Don't go extreme, don't just go from nothing to skydiving, but you start to kind of test the boundaries of that. And the more you do it and have good experiences, right? You go somewhere high and you actually have fun. You start realizing, hey, this isn't as bad as I thought it was. Like this belief I had was kind of irrational. And so those are really like the 3 main ways that anybody like adopts a belief. And those are the same ways you can use to change your beliefs. I talk all about this in the Spirit, Mind, and Body method. And it works tremendously. But I think if you go down that process, identifying, finding out where they came from, figuring out what better beliefs you can replace them with, and then start practicing through those techniques that we just talked about, you'll find that over time, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but a little bit of time, you'll start to see, think, and do things differently. And a lot of our actions, more actions than you could probably even possibly imagine. The longer I've gone and studied all this stuff, the more I realize like I'm not really as in control of myself as I think I am. It's so much more subconscious, right? And so a lot of your manifestation practices just become about training your subconscious to produce the actions that you want. And so as you start to go down this road, you'll start to train yourself to be completely different, to think completely different, and more than likely get completely different results in life. I hope this helps. I love you so much, and I'll see you again soon.